First Samuel. I gotta say, First Samuel is probably my favorite book in the Old Testament. It's got such depth to it in so many ways. It's a little easier to follow, I think, than a lot of the stories we've been reading, and it's got characters who are relatable. Um, I'm pretty confident in the historical accuracy, so to speak, of it. It's just a really full book, one that I'm glad we get to read together. I and as such, I would encourage you if you can sort of put your mind or your spirit in a place as you read or as you listen, um, to be in a place where you read this devotionally. Specifically, I want you to read all of it devotionally, but maybe kind of retune yourself for First Samuel to read it devotionally, not just informationally. So kind of put yourself in a place of spiritual openness, I guess, not just so you retain information. So the major players in Samuel are Hannah, who is introduced as one of the first characters. She's a mother who's not able to have children, and she prays that she will have a child. There's Eli, who is a judge. He's a priest. This is kind of a continuation of the judge's story. It's just the next chapter in it. Um, Eli is a priest who has varying levels of faithfulness. There's Samuel, kind of the central character, who is the son of Hannah, who had prayed for a child, and Samuel is kind of the last judge, so to speak, and he's quite faithful. In his old age, he is kind of the pivot person for transitioning from the age of judges to the age of kings. Then there's Saul, who's the first king over Israel. There's David, who is King David. You've read David and Goliath, same David. Um, David is the son of Saul and kind of the central king in Israel's story. We get introduced to all these people in First Samuel. So yeah, big picture, Samuel's the last faithful judge, and we move to a monarchy, move to having a king. Remember, the judge in the era of the judges, the tribes of Israel are sort of spread out, and there's this loose confederacy. And the judges are people who God has chosen to lead in certain times or over certain parts of the group. But moving to a king centralizes power, right? And anyway, that's the First Samuel is sort of the pivot to that. So there's this cry out for a king. We want a king. We need a king. And you've all heard this. Maybe you've said this. Well, everybody else has a king, and we don't have a king, right? Recall that Israel, the Hebrew people, these are God's people who are chosen to live differently, who are chosen to live a particular kind of life. And yet they say, "We want a king." Samuel, the priest, the judge, says, "Well, God said no. We still want a king." And so there's this then back and forth between Samuel and God. They want a king, but it's not a good idea. And God eventually says, "Okay, if they want a king so bad, let them have it." I mean, what is it? That almost sounds like a parental kind of thing, right? Well, everybody else has this thing. Well, you don't need it, but everybody else has it. Well, go ahead then, see what happens, right? You can kind of that's why I say read this devotionally. You've had these conversations before. So Saul is the first king, and he's kind of stereotypical, tall, tan, and handsome, right? He's got military might. He's strong. He's going to be a good king. And at best, Saul has mixed results. And we read about when you read through this, one of the implications for this is that this idea of kingship is morally neutral. God never says having a king is bad. God can lead kings, but ultimately kings get a lot of power, and if the kings don't want to use that power to follow God, then they're free to choose that. But that's ultimately going to result in their people's detriment, to their people's detriment. And so, it, absolute power corrupts, right? And power absolutely corrupts, right? That's kind of the old saying that the more centralized the power is, the more corruption that comes. And we see that in modern day. We see that in First Samuel in the Hebrew people. Some other themes. This is a historical book, but I'm going to make the case that this book is mostly theological. Again, I want you to read it devotionally. This book is mostly about who God is and what it looks like to follow God. So recall Israel's God's chosen people. So they have these judges who are chosen by God to exert some kind of power, though not nearly as much power as a king would have. So, but a king inherits power, right? Well, my dad was the king, therefore I'm going to be the king. How does that play into this? What does it mean for Israel to be set apart, to be different, and now all of a sudden they're trying to be the same as everybody else? There's these questions that kind of undergird all of it. The characters in First Samuel in particular, and Second Samuel as well, but First Samuel in particular have this depth to them. We don't run through it really fast in most cases. None of these characters are without their highs and their lows. Familial relationships. There's a lot of family stuff going on in First Samuel. They are those relationships are messy and they're intertwined with politics and military and religious concerns. David, for instance, is deceptive at times and he's faithful at times. Basically, people are complicated, right? Even people um, who have varying degrees of wanting to follow God are complicated. That's part of the human condition. And then finally, the last theme that no matter what we do, no matter what God's people do, God ultimately is the one who holds the power over all human rule. Military might look good to people, but not so much to God. So I hope you'll read this devotionally, not just informationally, and happy reading.